I learned that when you're grieving, and please keep in mind, whatever your loss is, doesn't just have to be a death. While you're grieving, we can do things that seem strange. And I learned that that was okay. Welcome to The Onion Peel, a show where we get real, raw, and honest about life. It's a space where authenticity lives and hope resides. The Onion Peel is a place where we peel back the layers of our stories and discover the unexpected flavoring that each one brings. Hey guys, I'm your host and semi-crazy Christian, Angela McConnell. I'm a middle-aged mom of 5 with a dead husband, and I've been through some shit in my life. Now, I'm on a mission to bring hope to the world. So join me as we journey through this onion and find hope in the tears. You ready to peel this thing? Well, hello, guys. Thanks for joining me today on The Onion Peel. I hope you guys have had a good week. I had a busy week, but it was a good week. So now it's time to sit and do some peeling of this onion. I think today's episode, I want to talk about grief. Grief doesn't just happen because of death. Grief happens every day. And we mourn over things that sometimes people think we shouldn't mourn. But a loss is a loss, period. It doesn't really matter what it is. Your heart still feels it. It could be a loss of a job for all different kinds of reasons, whether it was a job you loved or because now you don't have the income coming in that you once did. It can be the loss of a marriage when you get divorced. Even if it was a divorce that you wanted, it's still a loss of the way that your life was and the way that you thought your life was going to be. Perhaps maybe even the loss of the fairy tale. Because when we're young, we all think that life is going to turn out a certain way, or that by getting married, having kids, scoring the job or career that you wanted was somehow going to fix our hurts, right the wrongs that have been done to us, all those things. So we all get wrapped into that fairy tale solution. You could also have the loss of a pet, your dog, your cat, a farm animal that you were close to. It could be anything. I mean, some people have pet ducks and pigs and all that good stuff. And that's really difficult because there are friends, there are family members. It could be the loss of a friendship. Again, even if it was one that you knew was toxic and it was time to have it ended, there could be a point of relief that you don't have to deal with it anymore. But then there's also the grief of that person was somebody in your life and now they're not. It could be the loss of a home. Maybe you're downsizing and it's actually even something you're looking forward to. Less maintenance, less work, less money, but yet you're giving up the home that you raised your children in. That's a loss. It's something that you have to grieve. It could be the loss of something that you've had to give up, like a car, because kids are going to college and you know what? It's time for the brand new car to go because you need to help your kids through school, or simply because you have to put food on the table. Grief shows up everywhere. It could be the loss of, especially for women, but I think this applies to men, after having babies. Our bodies aren't the same. Nothing's the same. And that is not fun. And I think, speaking as a female, you have to go through a period of mourning that wonderful 20-something body that you had. and learn to adjust to this new one. The point is, grief is in so much of what we do because we live life and life is constantly changing. And so I think the key is that you have this grief and that if you don't process it or mourn it, then it very easily turns into depression. And depression stays around. Sometimes you go from grief into a situational depression, which is that you're still kind of mourning what your loss was, but it's not processing through as quickly as possible. So you're sitting in a place of depression for a while. For me, when Don died, obviously with tragedy, you have shock at first. And a lot of the situations I just talked about can start off in shock. I mean, we can all have a situation where we lose our job, just boom, it's gone, and you're in shock. And being in shock is not fun, but it is a necessity because your brain is trying to catch up to your reality. And it's a very difficult thing to do because it's trying to work really hard to analyze and process through what the hell is going on. And that shock and that time frame that your body and your brain needs can last months. This whole thing of, oh, you're in shock for a few days or a few weeks. Yeah, sure, sometimes, but I'm telling you, for me in my situation, I know my shock lasted months. I've often said that for the first 14 months after Don died was so incredibly foggy and hazy. I don't have a lot of very specific memories, but the ones that I do are crystal clear. It's just everything gets very cloudy during that time. That first year the kids were back in school, it's just a very cloudy time for me. I don't have sharpness when I think of the memories during that time. But I would say the shock started to probably wear off, September, October. It's when it really started to move into solid grief. And that grief was so intense. I experienced symptoms and physical embodiments of my grief that I never thought was possible. I developed in my back this pain that was kind of like in the middle of my back between my shoulders. I have no idea what it was other than the tensing of my body 24/7, but it hurt terribly. You couldn't rub it out. You couldn't put a heating pad on it and have it go away. You couldn't take a warm bath. It was just there all the time. That lasted for a solid year. And because of where the pain was, it really transfigured my posture. It was the pain in the back, but it was also the feeling of being crushed. And I know that when I would look in the mirror, like if I'd walk by a full-length mirror or something, there'd always be a moment or two when I would look over and just go, holy crap, I'm like actually hunched over right now. It's like my body wanted to constantly be in the fetal position. Another major thing that happened to me after Don died, which seems questionable, but I just know for a fact that this changed a lot after Don's death, and that was my eyesight. I had just gotten to the place where I was starting to wear reading glasses, and I would go and get the readers, but they weren't very powerful. I don't know, they were probably like a 1, maybe. But as my body grieved the loss of my husband, I've deducted it down now to the stress of what that entailed. And I'm telling you what, within a year, my eyesight had deteriorated dramatically. And I was at a 2.25 reading prescription in a year. I couldn't believe it. One of the worst ways that my body reacted to grief. And probably one of the most devastating to me, especially as a female, was that I began to lose my hair. And for anyone out there that has been through this or is going through it, especially as a woman, not to discount the men, my heart goes out to you. I did not lose all my hair, but I did have it thin out dramatically. I can't imagine even losing it all. It has to be extremely difficult because I can speak just from what I went through with it. And it was really, really hard. I just started to notice that when I was brushing my hair, tons and tons of hair was coming out on the hairbrush. And at first I was like, oh, maybe I'm going through that shedding season because they say our hair goes through cycles. So I thought, well, maybe that's what's happening. But when it continued to go and go and go, and I was just shocked at how thin it was becoming. And it just devastated me. It really did. And I know that that might sound vain, and maybe it was. I don't know. All I know is that when you're struggling every single day to try and get up and be there for your kids and try and figure out the mess of what your life is, to have to look in the mirror and see that you're deteriorating in the way that you look just sucks. And I'm the type of gal that I wear makeup. I like to do my hair. I like to look cute in clothes. That's just my style. That's just who I am. I've always been like that. So I decided that I was going to have to come up with a solution to my hair loss. And it had to be immediate. I couldn't sit and wait for another 2 years for my hair to grow. My hair grows extremely slow, always has. So it wasn't like, oh, go take some vitamins and, it'll start to get better. I didn't have time for that because I was a sinking ship and I had to be able to at least do something so I didn't completely drown. And now having hair loss on top of it was going to be something that could sink me. As ridiculous as that sounds, that was the truth. So I went and I actually got extensions, which extensions are a big deal now. Lots of women do them. But I got the good kind of extensions. I couldn't really do the clip-ins because I didn't have a lot of hair for the clips to sit in. So I had to go get the sew-ins, which were very expensive. And I didn't have the money to be spending on hair extensions. But I did it anyway. You see, I knew that I had to survive. So if that means going to buy a weave with money that you don't have and trusting God that he's going to find a way to make sure you have the money because that will keep you swimming, then that's what you do. It's very simple. Because having those hair pieces was like giving me a mask. So I could go out into the world that was so scary to me and at least feel like I looked okay. At least what I thought was okay. And so I could hide behind that mask. And that's what I did for about 2 years. And then eventually my hair started to grow back, and the rest is history, and I no longer needed the extensions. Another symptom of my grief, and probably besides the hair loss, and this one has lasted the longest, and it hasn't been until the last year that it has actually been cured. And that is that I have had PTSD. It has affected my sleeping in a very major way for the last 6 years. I awake every morning with tremors, almost like I don't want to say a mini seizure because I've never had a seizure, so that's not fair of me to compare that. But my entire body would shake as I was waking from the sleep cycle to the wake cycle. But the thing was, it wasn't just one time every day. It was any time that I would go from sleep cycle to wake cycle. Now, for any of us out there that are our age and have had kids, you don't sleep the night through anymore. So this would happen multiple times every single night and morning. Anytime I had to get up to go to the restroom, grab a drink of water, whatever it was that would take me from sleep cycle to wake cycle, that transition was always met with tremors. Also keep in mind that it was not just the physical tremoring, but when I was having them, it was intense darkness and fear and pain while the tremors were happening. The reason that all this was happening is because my brain had made a groove embedded in the tissue that says, Mayday, Mayday, we're waking up. That means we have to prepare. Remember what happened last time we woke up? It wasn't good. We were told Don killed himself. As you know from my story, that I had 2 sheriff deputies that woke me up, and it wasn't really done in the best manner. It was done very coldly, without any compassion. It was a very vulnerable place that I was in, as I have shared before. That is how I started that day on June 24th. And my brain remembered that. And that's what PTSD is. A remembrance of a very bad time. Thankfully, through doing research, having therapy, and mostly prayer, I am now a year out from not having any tremors, and I know that I've been healed from them. So anyone out there that struggles with dealing with PTSD, please know that there is hope and that you can improve and get healed. Another funny symptom of grief that I had, I mean, it wasn't funny at the time, but I still have to say that this one still kind of sits out there a little bit, and that is fear of getting my mail from the mailbox. I know, sounds hilarious, doesn't it? But, oh my gosh, I cannot even tell you the fear and anxiety that I would have to go get the mail. Because I spent so many days going out to my mailbox over the course of years, receiving bad news. From eviction letters, court dates telling me to show up for certain things, bills and debt that I had no idea existed, which then opens up a whole can of worms as to learning all these other things that I didn't know were going on that Don hadn't shared with me. I hated getting any kind of bill because I was so financially strapped that I just didn't know what I was going to do to pay for it. The other reason was because the place that Don had his truck parked when he took his own life was right next to our mailbox. To this day, we've moved, it's all good, and I still hate the mailbox. I do it, and I don't think a whole lot about it now, but I'm going to tell you what. If you ever want to give me a gift, man, send me junk mail. I love junk mail. To me, junk mail is the greatest invention that there ever was. Because the days I would go out to that mailbox and there would be nothing but a whole book of advertisements, are you kidding me? It was a good day. Yes, I do want my deck power washed. Yes, I think my gutters need cleaning. And absolutely, I want my kitchen remodeled. Yes, yes, and hell yes. And I guess that's a good example of seeing that grief shows up in all different ways. I learned a lot about grief also when I went to my grief group. The kids and I had a grief group that we went to. We went for about a year. I would sit in the grief group, and for a long time I just listened. But I learned so much about grief being in those meetings. I learned that when you're grieving, and please keep in mind, whatever your loss is, doesn't just have to be a death. While you're grieving, we can do things that seem strange. And I learned that that was okay. I remember I had one gentleman in my group who had lost his son. He was young, like 19 or 20. And he would wear his son's clothes. His jeans, his shirts, his sweaters, socks, shoes. Because that's how he felt close to his son. Didn't matter that it was all young people's clothing, as he's a, middle-aged dad. He wore his son's clothes to work. He wore his son's clothes all the time. And I know a lot of people would probably think that's strange, but I don't think it's strange at all. It was how he connects with his son. It makes him feel close to his son, and that helps fill his heart up. So that's really awesome. There was another woman in there, and one day she brought in this huge collage of pictures. Huge. Like, I'm talking probably, it had to be 3 feet by 4 feet. It was a huge board. It was packed with pictures of her husband, who had passed away from some form of illness, cancer, or some sort of, lung or heart disease, something. So she brought this board in and she starts passing the board around to each one of us. And I'm thinking, oh, this is cool. She's going to share just a bunch of family pictures and travel trips that they took on and things like that. Well, by the time the board comes to me, I just took a deep gasp because it was all pictures of her husband in his final days. And he was gaunt and tubes all over and didn't even look like he was breathing. I mean, he was gray and so frail. They were hard pictures to look at. I had expected that it was going to be pictures of when he was in his vibrant days. And this was the direct opposite. It was really hard to find words to say, and so I didn't say anything because, again, what I've learned is you don't always have to say something. You can just be in someone's grief with them. You could just be in that sad place as a friend without ever uttering a word. So for her, she wanted us to be on her journey. She wanted us to be a part of those last moments, those last days and weeks that she spent with her husband. She wanted to share that very difficult time in her life with us. And that was an honor. There's one more story I'd like to share with you regarding grief. And this one is from my storyline. And it's a really good example of how grief can manifest itself. So it was the beginning of October. So we were back in school for about 2 months. And it was time for parent-teacher conferences. So I walk in the gym. I had trepidation about having to go because of one main reason, and that was because Don and I had always done parent-teacher conferences together. We had never, in all our years of parenting, missed one parent-teacher conference together. There was never a time where he went and I didn't go, or vice versa. So it was very apparent to me that I was going alone. It was one of those things that we did together, that this was the first time I was going to have to do it without him, and it was huge to me. But I knew I had to go. So I walk in the gym, I get my paperwork, I sit down. As I'm waiting for my turn to come up, there was probably 1 or 2 parents ahead of me. All of a sudden, I start to have a panic attack. Except it wasn't really a panic attack. It is what I now refer to as a wailing. My whole body began to just shake. And you know when you get that feeling like you're going to throw up and you're like, oh my gosh, I need to get to the bathroom right now. I'm not going to make it. I need a garbage can. I need something because I'm literally going to throw up right now. It was just like that, except I knew I wasn't going to throw up. Like I knew I wasn't actually going to throw up from my stomach, but I knew I was going to throw up something. It was like I knew I was just going to explode. And it was the weirdest feeling, and it was the scariest feeling because I was so confused as to what was going on with my body. I was absolutely like, what the hell is happening right now? So I literally grabbed my mouth, put my hand over my mouth, and I sprint through the entire gym. I was on the one side of the gym. The doors were on the direct opposite. I got up and ran as fast as I possibly could run towards the door. I'm sobbing immediately now. I push open the first set of double doors, go through the little vestibule, and I walk outside the second set of doors, and I get out there. Thank you, Jesus, that there wasn't any person in the parking lot. I get out onto the sidewalk, and I literally just start screaming, crying, doubled over, almost on the ground, trying to catch my breath. It was like my whole body was releasing pain from every avenue. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't stand. I couldn't focus. I was crying, but it was crying so hard that it wasn't even crying. It wasn't even like tears were coming out. It was a wailing. It was a release of my most inner pain and suffering down to the core of my existence. I've had a panic attack before, way before Don died. I know what they are. I know what they feel like. This wasn't it. This had panic in it, but it wasn't a panic attack. It was more than that. It was my soul wrenching. It was so confusing, to say the least, because I had never experienced anything like it. It came out of the blue. I certainly wasn't expecting my whole body to convulse and lose control. So I stayed outside on that sidewalk until it was over. Eventually I started to catch my breath and catch my mind. And I look over, and here comes the superintendent of the school with a box of Kleenex in his hands. And he walks over to me, hands me the Kleenex, and says, "Listen, we don't have to do this today. We can set up special conference time just for you with each one of the teachers." Just gets me choked up because of the kindness and the compassion and the understanding of the pain. And I looked at him and I said, "No, I have to do this. I have to do this right now." Now again, I'm going to ask, Where does that kind of strength come from? Seriously. I didn't have to do that day, but yet there was something deep in the core of who I was that said, oh no, we're doing this, bitch. We're not backing down. We're walking straight into the fire. All I can say, guys, for me, I know that that's God. Because there's nothing else to explain it. I'm not that strong. I was so broken, so beaten down, so shattered. And somehow I'm going to say, yeah, I got to go do these parent-teacher conferences? That doesn't even make any sense. So he said, okay, I'll give you a few minutes and then I'll come back and check on you. So he went inside and I sat out on the sidewalk collecting myself. There I was, Kleenex in hand, wiped my face up, walked back through the double doors, through the vestibule, and into the gym. And as soon as I opened those gym doors, the superintendent was waiting for me. Sorry, I can't keep crying through all of these. I'm sorry, guys. And he said, okay, you ready? And I just kind of shook my head. He said, okay, let's go do this together. And then he proceeded to walk with me. And we sat down, and he was with me as I went and waited for each teacher that I needed to talk to. And he was right there with me. Right in that moment of grief. I'll never forget that moment for as long as I live. I was in a puddle, but yet God sent me somebody right in that moment who was kind and loving, and he truly cared. And he just made me feel safe, and that I wasn't alone. See, the thing about grief is that when we are grieving and our soul is crying out, we are completely vulnerable because we don't have our walls up, because we can't. We're too broken in that moment. And you see, that's when we're in our purest state of who we are. That's what grief does. It just takes all of our defenses down. We don't have the energy to keep them up. We don't have the strength to push people away. Because we're hurting too desperately. All we can do is just be. In that moment, that's it. We can just be. The pain is too great. And we just need to feel it. The rest of the stuff, it just doesn't matter. Life, while we're grieving, becomes simple. Very simple. Because it becomes about surviving. And I don't care if it's the grief over the loss of your dog, or your house, or a loved one. We're mourning. And that's part of why grief is so beautiful. Because it forces us to just be raw in who we are, without all the protection mechanisms that we've acquired over our life's experiences. You know, do you ever wonder why you've heard in the Bible, blessed are those who mourn? I mean, have you ever heard that and thought, what? That doesn't even make any sense. How can somebody be blessed because they're hurting? Well, I'm going to tell you, you're blessed because you're in a place of truth. And it's pure, and it's simple, and it's beautiful. And that's where God is. He comes in and comforts you. And do you know why? Because that's the time that you'll allow Him to. Because you're living in the truth of who you are. So in the middle of my devastation, in the middle of my wailing, in the middle of my soul being crushed, God showed up to comfort me with hope by bringing this wonderful soul to come and take care of me. And it was a moment of such exquisite love. And only grief brings that about. Only grief provides that opportunity, because unfortunately as humans, we just don't go to that place when things are good. We don't. None of us do. You see, that's why it's okay sometimes that bad things have to happen. It's like a reality check. It sort of cleans the slate for a minute for us, because it brings us back to pureness, to rawness, to truth. There is beauty in pain. I'm not saying that I want it to happen again. I'm not saying it's fun, it's easy, or hey, let's wish for bad things to happen. That's not what I'm saying. But when it does happen the next time, try to embrace it. Try and look around to see the beauty and the truth of what it is. Because I promise you it's there. Okay. Whew. That got heavy, didn't it? Holy moly. Well, I think it's that time, guys. You know, the time to put this onion back in the bin until we talk again. I love you all, guys. Thanks for being on this journey with me. Don't forget to like, share, follow, buy my merch, do it all to help me spread hope to all of us out there that need it. I hope y'all have a truly beautiful day. Bye, guys.